Good evening. My name is George Stockberger. I am not a resident of the borough, but I own 215 South State Street, 209 Court Street, 211 Court Street, and the parking lot that faces or alongside of the Newtown Friends. And I have to give Alan credit. He has done a number of projects in Newtown that are very aesthetically pleasing. But remember one thing, Alan is a businessman and a developer. He is not a philanthropist. The pictures you see here are of a philanthropic nature. Now, Alan and I have locked horns over the last 30 years, but I need to give you a little perspective of where we are and how we've gotten to where we are. In about 2007, I proposed that we put 29 housing units on what was our Chevrolet dealership with some appropriate looking commercial use along State Street. When I put that proposal forward, a number of people in town about had a cow. What was it going to do with 29 houses to come in to the traffic pattern? What was it going to do to the quality of life of Newtown? Now, I have to confess, when Alan first proposed the original program, I was in favor of it. I was to have been a part of it. But let me tell you what's happened. In 2008, Alan invited myself and some members of my family over to a site in New Jersey, and proposed buying the property. I turned him down, flat. We intended, or our idea was, to have a plan for our location, because with the decline in the sale of domestic cars all over the country, but especially in Newtown, where it probably runs 80 to 90% import cars, my business was hurting. We had planned to move the Chevrolet operation over to our location on Sycamore Street. We could compress our operation and expected to weather the downturn in the domestic industry. In about 2008, possibly 2009, Alan Smith and Bob Hillier asked for a meeting, and some of my family attended that meeting. And Mr. Smith put forth a proposal for a partnership to develop our property, and also with the purchase of the Betty Cedia house and property. Now, part of the proposal put forth was to solve the parking problems in Newtown. Your proposal, as it stands now, doesn't add any parking spots, period. And we can say we're talking about 140 condominiums. When I went to the Planning Commission meeting, the number of units proposed was 325. That's a long way from 140. Now, this partnership was proposed. At no time was the partnership that was proposed by Alan Smith ever brought to fruition. Many times Alan was approached by myself and others, but we never received anything positive except vague promises. I made it clear that I would require interim help with the mortgage payments. When you're your own landlord and your business goes away and you have to borrow, we had borrowed heavily to try and keep the business afloat, I had no income to make the mortgage payments. Now, I was promised that such help with the payments would be forthcoming as part of a partnership. I believe it was in February of 2009 that Alan called for a meeting with my attorney and myself at his State Street offices in the Stocking Works. I was at the very outset of that meeting. He and Mr. Hellinger, I was told at the outset of that meeting that he and his partners would pay nothing That's a long way from being a partner. The next day, an article was published in the Bucks County Courier-Times announcing that I had quit the partnership. How could I quit something that never existed? I chose not to fight my battle in the newspaper, so I did not respond to this article. But we can all be very sure that the Courier just didn't happen to come up State Street that day and ask Alan Smith what was happening. I was behind in my mortgage payments. I owed my accountant's money. I owed my attorney's money. I had debts that came from closing our business. I had an obligation to pay those debts. The holder of the mortgage knew of the proposed development plans, and as did most of the borough residents. The mortgage holder asked if I had any other offers on the property that could be closed quickly. When I believed I had a partnership, I no longer sought other purchasers of the property to develop it. Now, I have been strung along for over a year. My payments are severely in default. Now, please understand one thing. I did have, in addition to the equity in my property and other properties and my home and a whole lot of things, I had over $750,000 in readily marketable securities as security against this property. At that point in time, I'd been beaten pretty much to a pulp. I didn't have it within me to fight another battle. So I was told to take the offer as presented by the Smith Group, or my property would be foreclosed upon or the mortgage sold. The particular institution that held that mortgage does not have a history of selling mortgages. The offer by Mr. Smith was dramatically lower than the value of the property. Now, I'm not a developer, but Newtown has a market for million-dollar homes or townhouses. We all know that. So how do you arrive at a value of the property? Well, I've been told you can figure 30 to 35% of the cost of the selling price of the house to be allocated to the purchase of the property and the improvements required upon it. So let's use a simple number of 30%, and we'll also use a simple number of 30 units. Well, 30% of $1 million is $300,000. Take it times 30 is $9 million. Take $100,000 off per unit to provide the infrastructure, and you've got a net value of the property of about $6 million. Now, please understand, in 2009, the market was virtually closed to real estate development. Anybody who tried to borrow money at that time, you know it was nearly impossible. So my holdings were about 7 acres on the west side of State Street with 2 modern brick buildings. My payment for that property was $2,550,000. This is, about enough to cover the mortgage and my loans. All my past due payments were made. All my penalties were paid. Every penny of money that I owed for interest accumulation was paid. Alan did buy and settle at the same day, a few minutes before he settled with me, Betty Cedia's property. The amount of money he paid for that property is public knowledge. Although it was recorded at $1, anybody can look it up. But when you take and look at the amount of money he paid per square foot, square yard, any way you want to measure it, I was set up. Now, some people may think that that is just smart business planning, and maybe it is, but I believe it was deceitful. Now, I don't have to worry where my next meal is coming from, and my life has been changed. I have paid virtually everybody back that we owed. I had to sell a lot of things I wanted to sell. I had to change my lifestyle. I didn't want to change, but we did it. Now, why am I standing here embarrassing myself by disclosing such nasty personal details? Look at what happened to the original proposal. It's absolutely nothing like you have before you now. Now, I supported that original proposal. It has changed from a glorious promise to something which I believed in totally. But I believe the way it's proposed now will irreparably harm the borough. The borough owns the municipal lot in front of the liquor store. Alan, would you care to tell people how the borough came to acquire that lot?
We gave it to them.
Right. Sounds like a very magnanimous thing, doesn't it? When did you do that?
Your memory's better than mine, George.
Excuse me, Mr. Stockberger.
I'm going to say about 30 years ago.
Yeah, Mr. Stockberger, can you conclude your remarks?
I like what he's saying.
Now, understand something. In that 30 years, Mr. Smith, I don't believe has paid a dime in taxes. He's not maintained the property. He's had to insure the property. But where is that lot? Directly in front of his businesses. Yeah. Sounded great, but he's not a philanthropist. He's a businessman. Now, if you will look at what happened to me and look at the change, the dramatic change that has come to this proposal, don't you see a parallel path? You're promised serendipity. Don't be so sure you're going to get it. The property is going to be developed. There's no question about that. It does not have to be developed to the intensity that is now proposed. I believe the Chief of Police believes that we require 2 more additional full-time patrolmen to cover this increased population. Those 2 patrolmen are going to cost the borough between $200,000 and $300,000 a year by the time you figure their pay, their taxes on their pay, the benefits. It's a lot of money. I think the area should be developed, but I think you need to look very carefully at what you're getting.